The scale at the Redlow depot could weigh 6 wagons of wheat before noon if the line moved. That morning it moved slow. I sat up on the seat of my lead wagon with my hands folded, and I watched the agent stamp my freight bill. 24 cents a hundredweight. I did not say anything. I only looked past his shoulder at the tariff board bolted to the depot wall. Painted plain. 15 cents. It had read 15 cents for as long as I had hauled grain to that platform. His name was Marcus Thorne. He slid the rate book shut on the counter between us like a man closing a door in your face. "Rates are set in Chicago, ma'am," he said. He said it loud enough for the line behind me. "You can grow wheat, or you can read law. You can't do both." There were 11 farmers waiting behind my wagons that day. Every one of them had a bill in his fist stamped the same. 9 cents over. 9 cents skimmed off every 100 pounds, off every man in that line, in the full sun, with the whole county watching. I folded my receipt in half. I folded it again. I put it in my ledger, and I climbed down and I walked to the water trough. I did not argue. That night I asked the depot boy for the one thing the company never meant a farmer to hold in her hands: the tariff they had filed themselves. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. My name is Della Rourke, and before we go on, if a story about one plain woman and a book she was never supposed to open is the kind of thing you came here for, then subscribe and stay with me to the end. And do me one small kindness. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back, because the scale that morning was not the beginning. It was near the middle. To understand it, you have to start with the biscuit tin. Redlow sits in Kern County, Kansas, out where the land goes flat and the sky does most of the talking. In 1923, we were in the 5th lean year running. The war had ended and taken the good wheat prices with it. A bushel that fed a family in 1918 barely paid the twine by 1923. Everybody in the county was doing arithmetic they didn't like. Counting seed, counting cows, counting the days to the next note at the bank. I had been widowed 3 winters by then. The flu took my husband, Tom, the same season it took half the pews at the Methodist church. He went in 4 days. One morning he was mending the harrow, and by Thursday he was gone. I buried him on the rise behind the house where you can see the whole quarter section, and then I did the only thing a person can do. I got up the next morning and I worked it. A quarter section is 160 acres. It is a lot of ground for 2 hands. But I had grown up on wheat and I married into wheat, and my body knew the work even when my heart wasn't in it. I plowed and I drilled and I prayed for rain like everybody else. And in the fall I hauled my crop to the Redlow depot, same as my neighbors. Because the Meridian Central Railroad was the only way anything left Kern County. Cattle, wheat, cream, a coffin. It all went out on their rails or it didn't go. There was one more thing I did that nobody else wanted to do. I kept the books for the co-op. We had a little grain cooperative in Redlow. 40-some families who pooled what they could and shipped together to get a better say. Somebody had to keep the shipping ledgers straight. Who hauled what, on what day, at what weight, for what charge. It is tedious, dull work, and every year at the meeting the men would look at their boots when it came time to name a keeper. So I took it. Not because I was clever. Because nobody else wanted the bother. And here is a thing I did that had no reason to it at all. I kept every freight receipt. Every single one. 6 harvests worth. Going back to before Tom passed. Stuffed in an old biscuit tin on the kitchen shelf. Not for any purpose. I couldn't have told you why. Only that throwing paper away felt like waste, and I had been raised by people who did not waste. So the tin sat there getting heavier every fall, and I never once thought it would matter. You should love a thing before you learn it was armor. Now I'll tell you how it started to go wrong, and it started small, the way these things do. The first bill that struck me was my own. It was early in the harvest, before the big rush. I brought in a light load, 300 and some hundredweight, and Thorne stamped it out at 24 cents. I stood there with the receipt, and I did what I always do. I looked at the board on the wall. 15 cents, it said. Painted right there in the depot where any man could read it. I am not a woman who makes a scene. But I am a woman who keeps a ledger, and a ledger does not lie to you and it does not let you lie to yourself. 9 cents is 9 cents. On 300 weight, that is a few dollars. It doesn't sound like much. But I had been shipping into that depot for years, and I could not remember the board and the bill ever disagreeing before. So I went home and I did the sensible thing. The polite thing. I wrote a letter. I sat at the kitchen table with the good pen and I wrote to Mr. Marcus Thorne, freight agent, Meridian Central Railroad, Redlow, Kansas. I was plain and I was courteous. I wrote that I had noticed my freight bill was stamped at 24 cents a hundredweight, and that the tariff board posted at the depot read 15, and I asked, respectfully, if he would explain the difference to me. That was all, no accusation, just a question a bookkeeper would ask. And then I did the thing that would matter more than the letter. I wrote it out twice, one to send and a carbon to keep. I put the carbon in the tin with the receipts. I told myself it was habit. I never got an answer, not a word. 2 weeks went by, then 3. I would see Thorne at the depot, and he would nod at me the way you nod at weather, and he never once mentioned my letter. That was the first warning I gave them, in writing, with a copy kept. And it went into the dark like a stone down a well. The second thing I saw happen to somebody else. Old man Halloran had farmed north of town since before there was a town. He was near 80 and his hands shook, but his mind was sharp as a tack, and he had noticed the same thing on his bill that I had on mine. Halloran was not a quiet man. He walked right up to the counter one afternoon with 3 of us standing near, and he asked Thorne straight out to let him see the rate book. Just to see it, to read the number with his own eyes. Thorne had the book right there on the counter. His hand was on it. And he slid it back off the edge and under the counter, and he said, "The book's not for you to thumb, old-timer. I want you to sit with that a moment." A man asked to read a public rate, posted by law, and the agent pulled the book out of his reach and told him it was not for him to touch. Halloran stood there with his hat in his hands. He was 80 years old, and he had broken that ground with a mule team, and a company man half his age told him the numbers were above his station. Halloran didn't say anything back. He just turned and left, and I watched his shoulders as he went. And something in me went hard and quiet and stayed that way. The co-op tried the proper channel too. That fall, at the lamplit meeting in the church basement, the men voted to send a petition to the railroad's division office over at the county seat. A real petition, signed by every family, asking the road to explain the rate and put it right. We wrote it careful. We had the school teacher check the spelling. We sent it registered so there'd be a record it arrived, and we kept a copy, because by then I had taught the co-op what I knew in my bones. Keep the copy. Always keep the copy. That was the second warning, filed with a witness, signed by 40 families. And it went the same way as my letter. Into the silence. No reply came. Not that fall, not that winter. The division office was a long way off, and it did not answer letters from wheat farmers. You see what they were doing, even if they didn't. Every time they ignored us, they thought they were making us go away. What they were really doing was building a record. 2 written warnings, both delivered, both with copies kept, both ignored. If it ever came to it, no man could stand up and say we hadn't asked nicely first. We had. Twice, in writing. That politeness would turn out to be the sharpest thing we owned, though I didn't understand it yet. The one who made me understand was the depot boy. His name was Eli Pruitt, 19 years old, quick and thin, the telegraph clerk at the Redlow station. He ran the wire and swept the platform and did whatever Thorne told him. But Eli had grown up on a farm south of town before his people lost it. And he knew whose side he was on even when he had to keep it off his face. One evening late, after the last train, I was loading empty sacks and Eli came over to help me lift them. And lo, without looking at me, he said a thing I have never forgotten. "You know they file those rates, Mrs. Rourke," he said. "By law. They have to file every rate with the state before they can charge it. And once they file it, that's the number. They can't charge above it." Not a penny. He set a sack in the wagon. "The book on that shelf is the only truth that counts. Not what Thorne says, not what comes from Chicago. What's written in the book they filed themselves." I stood there in the blue dark with a grain sack in my arms, and I felt the whole thing turn over in my head like a key. They had to file the rate. And once filed, that rate was the law. 15 cents was not the board's opinion. It was not a suggestion painted on a wall. It was the legal, filed, sworn rate that the Meridian Central Railroad had itself sent to the state of Kansas and promised to charge. Every time Thorne stamped 24, he was not setting a price. He was breaking a law that the railroad had written for itself. "Where's the filed one kept?" I asked him. "Quiet, like he'd been." "On the shelf behind the counter," Eli said, "and a certified copy at the division office. But a farmer never sees either one." That's the whole trick of it, Mrs. Rourke. The truth's sitting right there. They just never mean for you to hold it. I went home that night and I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and I did arithmetic. 9 cents. Just 9 cents a hundredweight. On my crop, a few dollars. On the co-op's crop, more. On the whole county's crop, harvest after harvest after harvest, I did not have the full number yet. But I could feel the size of it in the dark. The way you feel the size of a barn you can't see. It was big. It was very big. And it had been happening in plain sight. On a scale everybody walked past, next to a board everybody could read. Now I have to bring you back to the morning I started with. Because everything I've told you was leading to it, and it was the day the private hurt became a public one. It was the heart of the harvest and the depot was jammed. Wagons backed up along the road in the sun, teams stamping, men wiping their necks, wheat dust hanging gold in the light. I had my 6 wagons, and I was near the front. And I watched, up and down that line, as Thorne stamped bill after bill after bill. 24 cents. 24 cents. 24. 11 farmers. Every one of them billed the same 9-cent skim right there together, so that for once it wasn't a thing that happened to you alone at your own wagon. It was a thing happening to all of us at the same time, in the same sun. And that is when Thorne said it. When I looked at the board and he saw me look. "Rates are set in Chicago, ma'am. You can grow wheat or you can read law. You can't do both." And he shut the book. Now here is the strange part. He was right that I couldn't do both at once. But he had it backward. It was because I could read that I was about to do something no man in that line thought a farm widow would do. He thought he was closing a door. He was handing me the key and telling me it wouldn't fit. I folded my receipt. I put it in the ledger. And I did not argue, because arguing at a depot counter is how you lose. You lose your temper and your dignity, and you give a man like Thorne a story to tell. I had learned that from keeping books. You don't win an account by shouting at the numbers. You win it by getting them right, on paper, where they can't wriggle. So I got mine right, and I climbed down, and I drove home past those 11 wagons, and every face I passed I marked in my mind. Because I was going to need them. Not yet, but soon. That was the peak of it, out in the open. What came after was quieter and worse. The 9 cents was not just an insult, it was starving the county. You have to understand how thin the margin was in those years. A farm ran on almost nothing. 9 cents a hundredweight over a whole crop was the difference between making the note and not making it. And that fall, the notes came due. Boyd had a place east of mine, good ground, a family of 5. The bank called his mortgage that October. Called it in full, because Boyd was short, and Boyd was short by about what the freight overcharge had bled out of him over the years, though the banker never said so. And never would. I sat with Nell Boyd at her kitchen table while she cried into a dish towel. and I could not tell her the reason her farm was going because I could not yet prove it. That is a particular kind of helplessness. To know the cause of a thing and hold no paper that says so. The Reyes family sold their milk cows that same month. They had come up from down south years back and worked harder than anybody I knew. And they kept a good little dairy on the side to carry them through the lean wheat. And they sold the cows one by one, and I watched Anselmo Reyes lead the last one down the road to the buyer, not looking left or right. Because a proud man does not want to be seen doing it. Those cows were the difference between staying and going. And they went the same direction the freight money went. Away. I could name you 5 more families. I won't. You felt the shape of it. A whole county being quietly wrung out, 9 cents at a time, by a company that had promised the state it would charge 15 and charged 24, and slid the book shut when anybody asked. I got as far down as I have ever been, those weeks. Because the 2 proper ways had failed. I had written my letter. The co-op had sent its petition. Both ignored. And what is a plain person supposed to do when the polite roads are closed? You start to believe the thing they want you to believe. That it is simply the way of the world. That the big win and the small lose, and that is weather, not injustice, and you may as well curse the sky. And then one night I sat down at my own kitchen table and I opened the biscuit tin. I don't know what made me open it. I was going to add that harvest's receipts to it, I think, and I lifted the lid and there they all were. 6 harvests. Every freight bill I had ever been handed at the Redlow Depot, and my carbon letter to Thorne, and the co-op's copied petition. All pressed down together in a tin that had once held sugar cookies. I ran my thumb across the edges of that paper, and the whole thing landed on me at once, so hard I had to sit back in the chair. I already had it. Don't you see? I had been carrying it for 6 years. Half of it. I had 6 harvests of proof of what they had charged. Stamped, dated, signed by their own agent. 24 cents, 24 cents, 24, in the railroad's own ink. I did not need to prove what they had billed. That was already in my hands, in my kitchen, in a cookie tin. I only needed one more thing. What they had filed. 2 columns. That was the whole of it. On one side, what the railroad said it would charge, the filed rate, the law. The 15 cents Eli swore was sitting on a shelf. On the other side, what it actually charged, my tin, 6 years deep. Lay those 2 columns next to each other and there would be no arguing, no shouting, no Chicago, no you can't do both. Just 2 numbers that were supposed to be the same and weren't. Over and over, year after year, in the company's own hand. The pain went out of me that night and something else came in. I am not going to call it anger. Anger is loud, and I have never been loud. It was more like the feeling when you finally see the bottom of a long column of figures and you know, before you check it, that it's going to balance. A cold, sure, settled feeling. Resolve, I suppose you'd call it. I was done being wrung out. I was going to lay the 2 books side by side and let the numbers do what numbers do, which is tell the truth whether anybody likes it or not. But I needed the filed page. And a farmer never sees the filed page. That was the trick, Eli had said. The truth's right there, and they never mean for you to hold it. So the next time I saw him, at the depot, quiet, over a stack of empty sacks, I asked him. I said, Eli, could you get me 1 certified page? Just the one. The class rate on wheat, filed, certified. So it'd stand. And I watched his young face while he thought about it, because I knew what I was asking. A certified copy came from the division office. To get one, a depot clerk would have to go where he had no business going and ask for a thing that would tell everybody exactly whose side he was on. If Thorne found out, Eli would lose his post, and the post was all his family had left. He didn't answer right away. He looked out at the tracks. And then he said, It'd have to be done careful, Mrs. Rourke. I know it, I said. And you're not just going to frame it and hang it on your wall. No, I said. I'm going to take it to the commission. He nodded slow, like a man agreeing to step off into deep water. "Then I'll get you your page," he said. And that was the last easy breath either of us took for a good long while, though we didn't know it standing there in the sun. I want to stop here and tell you plainly what I decided, because everything after this turns on it. I could have kept complaining. I could have written more letters, sent more petitions, cursed the railroad at every co-op meeting until I died. That is what they expected. That is what they were built to outlast. A company like the Meridian Central can ignore 1,000 angry letters. It has whole offices for ignoring them. What it cannot ignore is the law. And the law was the state of Kansas, and in Kansas there was a body called the Public Utilities Commission, whose whole reason for being was to hold a railroad to the rates it filed. I had heard of it the way you hear of the Capitol, as a far-off thing that had nothing to do with you. But it had everything to do with me. It was the one door that had not been closed, because it was not the railroad's door to close. So I did not write another letter. I got in my wagon and I drove to the county seat and I found the county clerk and I had him draw up a formal complaint. A complaint of overcharge and unlawful tariff against the Meridian Central Railroad Company. And I swore to it, right hand up, before the clerk, the way you swear to a thing you mean to stand behind. I stated that the railroad had filed a rate of 15 cents a hundredweight on class wheat and had charged 24 and had done so for 6 harvests, to me and to the shippers of Kern County, and I asked the commission to hear it. The clerk stamped it and docketed it. A hearing, he told me, would be set. About 45 days out, given the calendar. 45 days. I walked out onto the courthouse steps into the cold, bright air, and I stood there a minute. I had just, with my own name and my own hand, picked a fight with the largest thing in 3 counties. A widow with a quarter section and a cookie tin against a railroad, and I was not afraid, which surprised me, and I have thought since that it was because I finally had the fight in the right room. Not at a depot counter where Thorne made the rules. In a hearing room, where the law did. The act. Not more suffering. Not another letter into the well. An act, sworn and stamped and docketed, with a date on it now, ticking. 45 days to turn one woman's cookie tin into the whole county's case. 45 days to gather every saved receipt from every farmer who'd thought to keep one, and to teach the ones who hadn't why it mattered, and to lay the whole thing out so plain that even a man who wanted to lie couldn't. 45 days for Eli to get me that one certified page without losing his place in the world. And 45 days, though I didn't know it yet standing on those steps, for the Meridian Central Railroad to hear that the Rourke woman had filed something at the county seat, and to decide what a company that big does when a farm widow will not slide the book shut and walk away. Because word travels on a railroad faster than it travels anywhere. It travels on the wire. And there was a wire at the Redlow Depot, and a man named Thorne who read everything that came over it. The paper was moving now. Mine at the county seat, theirs on the shelf, all of it about to be laid one column against the other. I had 6 harvests in a tin and 45 days on the clock, and a 19-year-old boy who'd promised me the one page that would spring it all. What I did not have yet was any idea how far the railroad would go to keep that page shut, or what it would cost the boy to open it. The first week I drove the wagon to 7 farms in 2 days. Not asking. Showing. I'd lay my own receipt on a man's kitchen table and set my finger on the figure, 24 cents, right there in the agent's hand. And then I'd point to the tariff figure I'd copied out in pencil from the depot wall before Thorne had time to notice me writing. 15. The difference printed itself on their faces the way sums do when a man finally does the arithmetic on something he has been paying too long to question. Old Halloran was the second farm. He had his bills in a tobacco tin, same as me, and when he spread them across the oilcloth his wife had to sit down. 6 years of overpayments stacked 4 inches tall. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I thought it was just the way of it." That was what I kept hearing. From Hector Reyes, from the Boyds, from the Peterson brothers who farmed together out past the draw. The way of it. As though the railroad had made itself a law of nature and not a company of men who had filed a schedule with the state commission and then charged whatever they pleased above it. Eli's words had given me that. It is not the way of it. It is a crime with a number and a date and a signature, and we have been keeping the evidence in tins without knowing we were doing it. I took their receipts with their blessing, and I listed every figure in a fresh ledger, farmer by name, harvest by harvest, and I kept that ledger locked in the chest beneath the extra quilt because I had begun to understand that the numbers in it were dangerous. By the third week, Thorne had heard something. I do not know how. The wire, like I said, or a neighbor who talked. Or the simple fact that 11 men had stopped complaining about freight rates and started smiling at me when I passed on the road, which is a change that notices itself. On a Tuesday afternoon, a horse I recognized came up my lane at a trot, and Marcus Thorne stepped down from the saddle before I had time to do more than set my canning jar on the porch railing and stand still. He said he'd heard I was asking around. I said I was. I said a woman alone has to keep herself occupied. He looked at me the way he looked at farmers when he slid the rate book closed, like he was waiting for me to understand the size of the thing I was standing next to. He told me the commission was a slow machine and a costly one, and that a case like mine, a single shipper's complaint, would take years to work and come to nothing, and that in the meantime the division office in Wichita had been reviewing which sidings along the branch were pulling enough freight volume to justify the stop. Redlow was, he said, a close question. I heard it for what it was. The whole town's shipping point, the whole county's connection to the elevator at Larned, gone, nobody's wheat would move. Not mine, not Boyd's, not the Reyes's, not a single kernel from a single quarter section in Kern County, if the railroad decided Redlow wasn't worth the brake pressure. I told him I hoped the volume numbers worked out in Redlow's favor. I offered him water for the horse. He rode back down the lane without taking it. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table and did not move for several minutes. Because I had not thought far enough. I had thought as far as the hearing room and the 2 columns and the matched figures. I had not thought about what a company does when it cannot win on the law and so decides to move the game somewhere the law does not reach as easily. A siding is not a freight rate. A siding is a business decision, and business decisions belong to the railroad. And all 40-odd farmers in Kern County would feel the same chill when they heard it. By Sunday I had told every man at the co-op what Thorne had said. I watched them. Some of them looked at their hands. Boyd looked at me, and then at the window, and then at his hands. The Peterson brothers exchanged a look I knew the shape of from years of watching men decide whether the cost of the right thing is too high. And I was in the middle of thinking I might have ridden the county for 3 weeks to fill a ledger that was about to be handed back to me folded in half, when the seed catalog arrived. The seed catalog looked like nothing. Kansas Seed and Grain, the same one that came every winter, full of drawings of corn taller than a man, and prices no farmer ever quite believed. I almost set it on the pile by the stove, but it was too heavy. I felt the weight of it before I understood it. A seed catalog is paper and paste and not much else. This one had a stiffness in the middle, a thing tucked flat against the spine. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened it, and near the center, pressed careful between 2 pages of clover prices, was a single sheet of official paper. It was the filed rate. The certified copy. The very page the company kept on a shelf behind the depot counter where no farmer's hand was meant to reach it. Stamped in the corner, signed by a clerk at the division office, dated and sealed. Meridian Central Railroad Company. Class rates, branch line, Redlow to Larned, 15 cents per hundredweight. There it was. 15. The number the tariff board on the depot wall had shown all along. The number Thorne had been charging over by 9 cents on every load from every farm for 6 harvests running. And on a scrap of newsprint folded inside, in pencil, in a young man's careful hand, 3 words. The truth that counts. I knew whose hand it was. Eli Pruitt. 19 years old, telegraph clerk at the Redlow station, a boy who'd grown up on a farm his own family had lost. He'd told me once, low, over the counter, that the road files its rates by law and can't charge above them. That the book on that shelf was the only truth that counted. And now he had gone and pulled that truth out from under the counter and mailed it to me under the cover of clover prices, and if Thorne ever learned it was him, the boy would lose his post and his character both. I sat with that a long while. The lamp burned down. I thought about how much a quiet person will risk when they finally decide the fine print is worth reading out loud. Then I got up and I got the biscuit tin down off the shelf. 6 harvests of freight receipts. I'd kept every one, not for any reason, only because throwing paper away had always felt like waste. Now the waste paper was a weapon. Each receipt stamped 24 cents a hundredweight in Thorne's own hand. And beside them now, the road's own filed page, sealed and certified, reading 15. 2 papers. 1 truth. I called the co-op together for the following night. Not at the depot, where the walls belonged to the company, and not at any man's house, where it would look like scheming. I called them to the church basement, where 40-some families had buried their dead and married their children, where the light was honest and belonged to nobody but the town. Near 80 of them came, more than I'd expected. Word had gone out that the Rourke woman had something to show, and a man who's been bled dry for 6 years will come out on a cold night to see the knife. I put 2 lamps on the long table. I set the certified page under one. I set the biscuit tin under the other. And I did not make a speech, because I have never been able to make a speech and because these men had heard enough talk from enough men in collars and cuffs to last them a lifetime. I said, read it yourselves. They came up in 2s and 3s. Old man Halloran first, near 80, who'd had the rate book shut in his face at the counter with the words, "The book's not for you to thumb." He put on his spectacles and he bent over the certified page and he read the number. 15. Then he took a receipt out of the biscuit tin, one of his own, and he read that number. 24. He straightened up slow. His hands were shaking, and it wasn't the cold. 15, he said. Loud enough for the room. It says 15. Filed, sealed, their own paper says 15. And then the arithmetic started. The way it does when farmers get hold of a thing. Somebody had a pencil. Somebody else knew the tonnage the county shipped in a season. 9 cents skimmed off every hundredweight. 300 and some hundredweight off a good quarter section in a decent year. Times 40-some farms. Times 6 harvests. The number they came to, out loud, in that basement, was near $38,000. $38,000 gone out of Kern County and into the Meridian Central Railroad, 1 9-cent skim at a time. So quiet that not one of us had felt it leave until it was all gone. A room can go very still. That one did. Boyd was there, whose mortgage the bank had called in October, whose wife Nell had wept at her own kitchen table. He looked at that number a long time. Anselmo Reyes was there, who'd sold his milk cows one by one to keep bread on the table. The Peterson brothers, who farmed together, passed the draw, all of them looking at a number that was the exact size of the hole in each of their lives. Then somebody in the back said the thing I'd been dreading. And if we push it, they pull the siding. Because Thorne had made sure that fear was planted. Ride the complaint through, and the division office in Wichita decides Redlow isn't worth the brake pressure, and the whole town loses its shipping point. Nobody's wheat moves. It was the one card the company had left, and they'd played it, and it had done its work. I watched 3 or 4 men's faces close up like doors. I didn't argue. I'd learned that much. You don't argue a scared man out of being scared. But Halloran did. He was near 80, and he'd farmed north of Redlow his whole life, and he'd lost enough to have nothing left to be careful with. He turned around to the man who'd spoken, and he said, "They can pull the siding." "Sure they can." And every year after they'll charge us 15 to haul to Larned instead of 9 over on top. You want to save the siding by letting them keep the skim? That's paying a thief to keep robbing you so he don't move away. Nobody had an answer for that. I'm going to the hearing, Halloran said. I'll drive myself if I have to. I've got 6 years of their bills in a tobacco tin at my house, and I aim to lay 'em on that commissioner's table. Now who's coming with me? It broke the way a dam breaks. Not all at once. One man, then another, then the Petersons together, then Boyd, then Reyes, until the church basement was full of men saying they'd come. The fear didn't leave the room, it just got outvoted. The hearing was set 45 days out, at the county seat, before the Kansas Public Utilities Commission. I'd filed the complaint myself, sworn before the county clerk, docketed and dated. In the weeks between, I copied the whole ledger clean. Every farm. Every receipt. 24 cents billed against 15 cents filed, farm by farm by farm, 6 harvests deep. I kept the fresh ledger in a locked chest under an extra quilt, because I no longer trusted that a widow's house wouldn't be visited. The company sent a rate attorney down from the city. Harlan Voss. A tall man in a good coat who'd made his living for years burying farmers' complaints in procedure and jurisdiction until they ran out of money or heart. I heard his name a week before the hearing, and I knew what it meant. The road had decided I was worth spending money on. That, at least, was a kind of compliment. We came in on the morning of the hearing in a way the county seat had never seen. Not one wagon. Not 5. Wagons from every quarter section in Kern County rolling in off every road until they ringed the courthouse square 2 and 3 deep. Men who'd sworn they couldn't spare the day had spared it. Whole families in the beds of the wagons. Near 80 men and their wives and half their children come to see whether the law was a real thing or only a word. Voss was waiting for us on the courthouse steps. He was good. I'll give him that. He came down to meet the crowd before we could get inside, and he spread his hands, and he spoke to us the way you'd speak to spooked cattle. Warm, reasonable, he said he understood our concerns. He said rate schedules were complicated documents, that they involved classifications and adjustments and long-haul allowances that took trained men years to understand, and that it would be a shame, a genuine shame, for good farming people to be led into a costly proceeding by a well-meaning neighbor who had simply misread a complex tariff. He didn't look at me when he said it. He said the well-meaning neighbor. He meant the woman. He was telling 80 men that their case rested on a farm widow who couldn't read. Some of them wavered. I felt it beside me, the shift, the doubt. Voss felt it too, and he pressed. He talked about jurisdiction. He talked about how these things took years. He mentioned, gently, so gently, that questions of continued service to small sidings were matters of company discretion, and that no ruling here could bind. Is it 15, or isn't it? It was Halloran, standing at the front, spectacles in his shirt pocket, hat in his hand. Voss stopped. I beg your pardon? The rate you filed, Halloran said. With the state. Sealed, the 15 cents. Is that number true, or did your railroad file a lie with the Commonwealth of Kansas? It's one or the other, mister. You tell these 80 people which. And Harlan Voss, rate attorney, who had come down from the city to talk farmers out of the truth, stood on the courthouse steps and could not answer a near 80-year-old man's plain question. Because there was no answer that helped him. If the 15 was true, he'd been skimming 9. If the 15 was a lie, he'd committed a crime against the state that dwarfed the one we'd come about. He said something about context. He said the schedule had to be read in full. Then let's go read it in full, Halloran said, and put his hat back on, and walked past him up the steps, and 80 people walked up behind him, and Voss's warm, reasonable voice fell away behind us like something dropped. The hearing room was small for the crowd it held. Hard benches, filled, men standing along both walls and out the door into the hall. At the front, a long table for the company's men, Voss and 2 others in good coats, and a chair for me, and up on the bench Commissioner Bird, an older man. spectacles, a careful and unhurried way about him. The kind of man who had spent his life reading the small print other men shut the book on. Voss opened for the company. He was smooth again, back on his own ground now, procedure and precedent, and he moved to dismiss for jurisdiction, and when the commissioner declined, he changed his aim. He turned it on me. He said the complaint rested on the claim that a filed tariff had been exceeded. He said the complainant was a farmer, not a trained rate clerk. He said, and here he turned to me at last, and let a little smile onto his face for the benefit of the room, that if the complainant truly understood the schedule she accused his client of violating, perhaps she would do the commission the courtesy of reading it aloud. Here, now, the class rate schedule, branch line, Redlow to Larned. If she claims to read it, he said, let her read it. He thought it was a trap. He thought he'd hand a farm woman a page of railroad tariff language, the classifications and the abbreviations and the long-haul columns, and watch her stumble, and the whole complaint would come apart in front of the men who'd staked their day on it. Commissioner Byrd looked at me over his spectacles. Mrs. Rourke, you're not obligated. But you may, if you wish. I wish, I said. I took the certified page. The one Eli had risked his post to put in my hands, sealed and stamped the road's own filed truth, and I read it. I read it slow, and I read it plain. The class designations, the commodity, wheat, in bulk, in farmers' loads. The mileage block, Redlow to Larned, the rate against that block. 15 cents per hundredweight. I read the effective date. I read the filing stamp and the name of the division and the signature of the clerk who'd certified it. I did not stumble. There was nothing to stumble over. A rate is a number, and a number is not hard to read when a man hasn't spent 6 years making sure you never saw it. The room was silent, all the way through. When I finished, I set the certified page down on the table. And then I reached into the biscuit tin, the one I'd carried into that room, the same one that had held 6 harvests of paper on a kitchen shelf for no reason but that throwing paper away felt like waste, and I took out the receipts. And I began to lay them on the table beside the filed page, one after another, each one stamped, in Marcus Thorne's own hand, 24 cents a hundredweight. 15 filed, 24 billed. Side by side, the Rhodes paper and the Rhodes paper, both true, both theirs, disagreeing by 9 cents a hundredweight across 6 harvests and 40-some farms. I said the only thing I'd planned to say. The book was never too hard to read. It was only meant to stay shut. Then I asked the commission to read the figures into the record itself, so it wouldn't be a farm woman's word but the clerk's. And the clerk took the certified filed page and the stack of stamped receipts, and he read them into the record, one against the other, in a flat official voice that made it worse than any speech could have. 15 filed. 24 billed. 15 filed. 24 billed. Over and over, receipt after receipt, farm after farm, until the pattern was so plain and so long that no man in that room could pretend it was a woman's misreading of a complicated document. It was a company charging 9 cents over its own sealed rate on purpose for 6 years. Voss did not object. There was nothing to object to. You cannot object to a company's own filed tariff. You cannot object to a company's own stamped receipts. He sat and he watched the clerk read his client's crime into the permanent record of the state, and the smile was long gone off his face. Commissioner Byrd let the clerk finish, all of it. He didn't hurry him. When the last receipt was read, he was quiet a moment, looking at the 2 piles of paper, and then he took off his spectacles and he spoke. He said the matter was not complicated. He said the company had filed a rate of 15 cents per hundredweight, and that a filed rate is the law, and that a common carrier may charge neither more nor less than the rate it has filed. He said the evidence showed, by the company's own documents, a charge of 24 cents against a filed rate of 15, a systematic overcharge of 9 cents per hundredweight sustained over 6 harvests against the shippers of Kern County. He said the 15-cent rate was restored, effective at once, and any charge above it from that day forward would be a violation the commission would not treat gently. He said the company was ordered to make reparation to every shipper on the branch, a refund of 9 cents per hundredweight on every load, back through 6 years of receipts. Every receipt like the ones read into the record that morning. He said the company would examine its own books to find any shipper who hadn't come forward and refund those too, and that he would be watching the accounting. And then he did the thing I hadn't dared hope for. He said he was aware, the record having raised it, that continued service to the Redlow siding had been questioned. He said the timing of that question, coming as it did alongside this complaint, was noted. And he ordered that the Redlow siding not be discontinued as a consequence of this proceeding, and that any move to do so would be treated by this commission as retaliation against shippers for the lawful exercise of their rights, and dealt with accordingly. The siding was safe. The one card the company had left, the fear they'd planted in the church basement, the thing that had closed those men's faces like doors, the commissioner had taken it off the table and torn it up. The room's held breath went out of it all at once. Not a cheer. These weren't cheering men. Just a long exhale, 80 people at once, and a low sound under it that might have been 40 years of swallowed anger finally allowed to leave the body. I didn't shout. I hadn't shouted the whole way through, and I didn't start then. I sat at the table with the 2 piles of paper in front of me, and I thought about Tom, buried on the rise behind the house, and I thought about how he'd have liked to see the book laid open on that table. And I let myself feel it for exactly as long as I let myself feel things, which is not very long, and then I put the receipts back in the biscuit tin. Then came the part I hadn't planned and couldn't have. The faces. Marcus Thorne was there at the company table, back a little behind Voss. He'd come down expecting to watch a farm woman embarrassed. When the commissioner finished, Thorne half rose, the way a man does when he's got to say something and hasn't thought what. And what came out of him was the same thing he'd been saying to farmers over that depot counter for 6 years. The rates come from Chicago, he said. We don't. The division sets the rates. They come from Chicago. It's not for us to. Commissioner Bird looked at him over the spectacles he'd put back on. The rate that came from Chicago, he said, was 15 cents. It is the number your own company filed with this state. It is the number on the certified page Mrs. Rourke read into this record not 20 minutes ago. He tapped the filed page on the table in front of him. Chicago filed 15. Mr. Thorne, you charged 24. Whatever came from Chicago, the 9 cents did not. That came from Redlow. Thorne sat down. He didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything else. The thing he'd hidden behind for 6 years, it comes from Chicago, you can grow wheat or you can read law, you can't do both, was the very thing that hanged him. Because Chicago had filed the honest number and he was the one who'd charged over it. His own excuse read his own verdict. Harlan Voss said nothing at all. He'd said all his words on the courthouse steps and they'd come to nothing. He capped his pen. I watched him do it. He capped his pen and he squared his papers and he put them in his case. The case he'd packed, thinking this was a matter of procedure he could bury, and he closed the case and he was done. He didn't look at me. A man like that doesn't look at the person who beat him. He looks at his own hands, the way scared farmers had looked at theirs in a church basement, and I found I didn't have the room in me to enjoy it. It was just true. He'd come to bury us, and he was going home buried. And the farmers. The ones who'd wavered, the ones whose faces had closed up when the sighting was mentioned, who'd stood on the courthouse steps half believing Voss when he called me a well-meaning neighbor who'd misread a schedule. They met my eyes now. One by one. Boyd first, who'd nearly lost everything. Then the Petersons. Then the man in the back of the church basement who'd said, and if we push it, they pull the siding. He came up after, and he didn't say sorry, because farmers don't. But he took my hand in both of his, and held it a second and let it go, and that was the same thing. We drove home the way we'd come. Wagons on every road, but slower. because there was no hurry in it now. October light coming down gold over the stubble. 80 families going home to farms the railroad had tried to bleed and hadn't managed to kill. That was the fall of 1923. The refund checks came over the winter. The company was slow about it, the way a big thing is slow, but Commissioner Bled had said he'd be watching the accounting and the company knew he meant it, and the checks came. 9 cents a hundredweight, back 6 harvests. It doesn't sound like much. 9 cents. Spread it across 6 years and 40-some farms, and it was near $38,000 coming back into Kern County that had been quietly leaving it, and for some men it was the difference between staying and going. Boyd's check was enough, with what he had, to satisfy the bank. He kept the farm. Nell Boyd baked me a pie and left it on my porch and didn't knock, which was how I knew what it cost her to be grateful to somebody, and I ate it slow over 3 days, and it was good. Anselmo Reyes bought back 2 milk cows. I saw them in his lot that spring, and I saw Hector run out to them the way a boy runs to something that had gone away and come home, and that was worth as much to me as anything on any commissioner's page. Eli Pruitt kept his post. I'd been afraid for him. A boy who slips a company's sealed tariff to a farmer under a seed catalog is a boy who can lose everything if the wrong man puts it together. But the commissioner's ruling had a line in it about the sanctity of filed rates being a public matter, and word came down, quiet, that a letter from Commissioner Bled himself had gone to the division office regarding the Redlow station's clerk, and after that, nobody troubled Eli. He was 19 years old, and he'd risked more than any of the grown men in that church basement. And he got to keep his job and his character both, and that was the ending he deserved. 6 months after the hearing, on an evening in the spring, I was on the porch at dusk. The wheat was coming up green, 4 inches maybe, the way it does, and the honey light was on it, and I had a cup of coffee going cold in my hand because I'd rather watch the field than drink. A buggy came up the lane. I knew the set of the man before I knew the face. Marcus Thorne. He'd been reassigned. Word had gone around. Not fired. A company that size doesn't fire a man for costing it $38,000. It just moves him somewhere smaller and lets him understand what he is now. He'd come down a rung. Maybe 2. And here he was on my lane at dusk. Hat in his hand this time, the way Halloran had held his hat on the courthouse steps. He had a paper with him. The company's new posted rate, filed fresh with the state, printed clean. He'd been sent, of all the men they could have sent, to have the co-op's bookkeeper certify for the record that the new rate was correctly posted at the Redlow depot. 15 cents per hundredweight, Redlow to Larned, filed and posted both the same. They wanted the woman who'd caught them to sign that this time they'd gotten it right. I could have made him stand there. I thought about it, I'll be honest. 6 years of 24 cents. The book shut in Halloran's face. The siding held over our heads like a hand over a lamp. I could have let him wait on my step and feel every minute of it. But I've never had much use for making a beaten man feel it twice. It doesn't put wheat in anybody's bin. I took the paper. I read it, all of it, plain and slow, the way I'd read the last one, because a person only learns to trust a rate 1 page at a time. 15 cents. Filed, posted, the same number on both. Honest, front to back. I signed it. I handed him back his pen. And I said the only thing I had to say to Marcus Thorne, then or ever. Charge what you printed. That's all anyone asked. He put on his hat. He got in his buggy. He went back down the lane at dusk, and this time I didn't offer him water for the horse, and he didn't stop for any, and that was the last I saw of him. I keep the rate book on the kitchen shelf now. The certified page, the one Eli hid in the seed catalog, standing against the wall right next to the biscuit tin. The tin's still got receipts in it. New ones. Stamped 15 cents, every one. The number that was always there on the depot wall for anyone who cared to look. The number they hoped a farm widow would never think to compare against her own kept paper. Down at the depot, they tell me, Eli Pruitt reads the rate aloud to any farmer who asks, and to a few who don't. Reads it off the board plain, so there's no mistaking it. A boy who learned young what it costs to lose a farm, making sure the next man in line knows exactly what he's being charged and why. That's the whole of it. A widow, a biscuit tin, a boy at a telegraph key, and a book they slapped shut one too many times in front of the one person who'd kept every scrap of paper they ever handed her. They thought quiet meant beaten. They thought a woman who didn't argue couldn't read. They bled a whole county 9 cents at a time and never once looked up to see who was keeping count. Somebody's always keeping count. If you've watched this far, I'd like to know. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels.